that showing up for everyone? All right. So thanks, everyone. As Carrie said, and I mentioned before, I'm the River Restoration Director for NEPRA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about water quality in the Neponset, our water quality monitoring program, which is the Community Water Monitoring Network, or CWMN, and NSP, and we're going to go from there. So for those, I'm sure a lot of people on the call are already familiar with our program for monitoring water quality in the Neponset, but for those who aren't, our Community Water Monitoring Network, or CWMN, is a volunteer-led program. We have 41 sampling sites all across the watershed, which takes monthly samples between May to October. It uses over 60 volunteers to go out to actually sample the water, collect some dissolved oxygen monitoring measurements, process the samples, and transport the samples. So it's a big group effort spearheaded that we wouldn't get anywhere without our volunteers. And so what we monitor at our sites are, all sites get bacteria monitoring, E. coli, total phosphorus concentrations, pH, dissolved oxygen, and temperature. And then we have a few sites that get additional analytes like chlorophyll, ammonia, orthophosphate, and total nitrogen. Why don't this want to go forward? There we go. And just in quick review of what kind of our program has highlighted or found over the past several years, our water monitoring has led us to do some long-term monitoring of our most troubled sites, both those that are listed at the state level for impairments and those that are not yet. And what we found kind of across the board is that our biggest issues are bacteria-based, excess E. coli making the water unswimmable, unboatable, high levels of phosphorus, not surprising given the regional concerns for phosphorus, and in the summer, low dissolved oxygen. Of the things we monitor, generally pH is not a major concern, and aside from our trout streams, temperature isn't that big a concern. Although, obviously, we don't want to say it's not a concern and then have it become a concern. The things that we kind of are still working out and still trying to get more information on from our program is the impact of phosphorus levels on algae growth and overgrowth of aquatic plants. So that's kind of a quick highlight of our program so far. And now that I've introduced it to you, I'm going to tell you how we're going to change it for this year. So as I said, we have 41 sites across the watershed. We're updating a few of the sites to kind of streamline some data management and collect a little bit more information. So in particular, we're taking 4 of our sites that kind of hit some key areas of the watershed. Kind of the western headwaters, what's coming out of the East Branch, up above Fowl Meadow, and then kind of right at the Baker Dam at the outlet of all the fresh water. We're kind of calling these sentinel sites, which are now getting tested for everything. So bacteria, phosphorus, nitrogen, ammonia, orthophosphate, chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen, temperature, and pH. And we're putting that in basically to say that, historically we've had kind of a mixed amount of these other parameters that go to various sites for historic reasons or reasons of wanting to know if something bad was happening. We've now kind of targeted these to know what's, at least we'll know what's coming out of the western side, the eastern side, before the confluence with Mother Brook, and then the whole watershed. So we'll kind of get a little bit more information as we go from there. And then we've also changed a few of our sites to get more pond and lake testing included. So some sites in Canton, Norwood, Sharon, Stoughton, and Westwood. The streams that we sampled that were near ponds, we've relocated them to ponds. So we're going to get a little more information from them. Don't worry, we're going to talk about in a minute how we're going to keep the bacteria monitoring we have at those streams with our supplementary program. And I think one of the big outcomes of our water monitoring program has been, excuse me, our annual E. coli report card. So we put together a report card with the Charles and Mystic Rivers and EPA historically to kind of highlight how our streams and waterways are doing. This is, again, looking just at E. coli for swimmability and boatability and kind of giving it an easy to understand score for most people, from A to F, and you want to get an A and you don't want to get an F, and marking how our streams are doing. to get a little bit of the technical aspects of it, it's mostly just a running average of the last 3 years, weighted by weather. So as we all know, bacteria values get worse after a rain event when there's street runoff and pet waste runoff, and it's usually a little bit better in the dry weather. So our 3-year average kind of weights based on what samples we're taking in rainy weather versus dry weather, and kind of averages to get a sense of what's happening, kind of over that 3-year span. And in terms of highlights, the good news is that most of our main stem gets A and B grades. It means it's usually swimmable and almost always boatable, which is usually the form of recreation happening on the river anyway. And most of our ponds get A grades, which again is great. Those are also the areas where people are likely to swim. But there is some more work done to mesh these grades with where people are actually using the river for, in-water recreation, and making sure we're monitoring the right sites and getting the information across. And again, these are annual trends and not something that we'd recommend people, look up the day before they plan to go swimming. So we want to make sure we're getting the messaging across in the right way so people know how to use this information. Some benefits of our report card monitoring program. It's brought us much closer to alignment with the Mystic and the Charles for how we analyze our data and report out our data. It's increased our public engagement because now we're working across 3 watersheds with some coverage from the EPA. It means that information about the Neponset tributaries can get picked up by the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald, rather than simply just the local newspapers, which maybe do or do not report the grades. We do have some great local newspapers that do cover our results, but I think creating it as a larger multi-watershed report gets a little bit more uptick from some media organizations. And the other success is that we hear a lot more from you guys, the municipalities. So town staff have asked what they can do for their tributaries and what things we can do to, turn those F's and D's into, at least B's and C's, if not A's. And I just want to highlight some of the other ways we get data. We normally talk about our water monitoring program and we focus on CWMN, which is obviously the biggest way we collect our data. We do have some other ways of getting some information about our waterways. The main one is Excel. So Excel Conservation Corps is a job training and placement program for wastewater operators, primarily operating out of Boston. But they recruit people who did not go to college to basically place them into a program where they are trained to do wastewater operations. They get their wastewater operator licenses and placement into jobs in wastewater industry. And so their primary focus is obviously on the processes by which wastewater is treated, but they work with us to collect surface water samples and better understand kind of the holistic ways that stormwater is different from sewage water, but also, also affects our surface waters running off of that. So they work with us to collect bacteria, dissolved oxygen, and pH data from 5 sites a month historically, although the program has expanded, and this year forward, we're really happy to say that they're going to do more of our sites, including all of our former swim-in sites that we've turned into pond locations. The stream locations will be maintained for their bacteria records, with Excel picking up the slack. The only problem with Excel is that we don't have the ability to collect nutrient data. We can do bacteria in-house, but we cannot do nutrient analysis in-house, and we can't reasonably collect the funds to get that processed by an outside lab. And we also have data from the estuary. So primarily most of our data from the estuary comes from the Mass Water Resources Authority. They collect routine samples within the estuary on timelines consistent with their programs, which is not always what we're looking for, but we're happy to use the data that's available. Mostly this is kind of in the form of studying water quality around former CSOs and part of their Boston Harbor monitoring program. But it provides at least a starting point of records for water quality in the Neponset estuary for us to work with. And that really leads us into what we're looking for from the estuary in the future. So we're looking into ways to collect more extensive data within the Neponset estuary. And I should, for people not around the estuary, say that the estuary goes from the Baker Dam in lower mills of Boston and Milton down. So it's the last 4 miles of the Neponset River from with shorelines in Dorchester, Milton, and Quincy. Um, we are either looking to get in this as a one-time large-scale data collection across the whole estuary, or as part of a recurring study system like SWMN, like Excel, going out year over year. It's going to depend a little bit on the funding basis and what we can put together. But really what we're looking for is some additional nitrogen, phosphorus, algae or primary productivity data, Enterococcus, the bacteria of concern in saltwater areas, dissolved oxygen, pH, and connectivity, all the kind of parameters we'd be concerned about in kind of a brackish or saltwater, freshwater mixed area. And the reason this is a little bit more complicated than our regular program is it's going to, in order to get a better sense of what the whole estuary is doing, we're going to need a mix of shoreline and mid-river sampling, surface sampling, which is what most of our waterways are sampled right now, and at depth sampling. And then one thing I didn't include in here is also the impact of tides. So tides are a little bit harder to consistently get people out at the right time if you're trying to maintain like a monthly sampling, but also a tide-based sampling. So the data we're hoping to collect in the estuary is going to be very useful for us in planning for helping the salt marshes out, but also learning what's the major impacts in terms of nutrient loading and ways we can plan to reduce that, both for water quality itself, but also for the salt marsh health and the climate resilience and habitat it provides. So all of that is kind of a big overview of what's going on with our water monitoring program and where we get our data. The next question is, what can we do with it? So as I said before, a lot of the things we do with our data is to track our long-term problem sites, kind of what we list our worst offender sites, and hopefully find ways we can improve them. We can identify emerging problems. So as sites begin to score worse and worse over time, they can, even if they're not the lowest scoring site yet, they can kind of come up on our radar as things we want to fix before they get too bad. Although the program doesn't involve any kind of water flow monitoring that has a lot of consistency, it does allow us to qualitatively track the drought impacts. So we hear a lot from our samplers about how low the water has been. Certain sites dry up in the summer faster than others. And we are able to track, at least qualitatively, what's happening with the drought. And it does help in advocacy about drought and knowing what the local impacts to our waterways are from drought. And the last real big one that we have is all this data we collect is submitted to the state. So Mass DEP's Watershed Planning Program collects this data as an external data source, which they use in their impairment listings and for developing remediation plans. And we hope to work with them in the future, especially with the estuary data, about planning the best way to collect that data and what we can do to kind of interpret it and analyze it for what to do next. The last thing we can do with our data that is kind of mediated by the fact that we all have things we want to do and not enough time to do it, but it does mean that we have a lot of data now, about 30 years worth of data, that we could do deep dives on trends by site, by town, by section of the watershed, so upper watershed and lower watershed, or water body type like pond versus stream versus main stem of the river. This is all data that we have and would be possible to look at. We'd love the opportunity to look at. If someone could just invent the 8th day of the week, let me know and we'll get right on it. And then just a quick terms of solutions, how we can use this data to know what to do next. And I've kind of broken it down into bacteria and nutrients. So for bacteria, we can clarify those long-term problem areas. We can do hotspot surveys where we more intensively sample up from a site and try to identify problem causes. So if it's a point source thing like a storm drain outfall, or if a stream crosses by a dog park that doesn't necessarily have the most robust buffer area, or a privately owned dog kennel that kind of abuts a riverway, we can kind of get a sense of what might be the issue. If it's dog waste or a potential sewer leakage or illicit connection, whatever it might be, these kind of hotspot surveys are maybe the first way to find out. And then we can also, as funds allow, consider adding DNA-based source tracking. So when you find bacteria, you don't necessarily know, did it come from humans, domestic dogs, or some kind of wildlife? If we were able to add on some DNA-based source tracking, we'd be able to get a sense from that, but it is a little bit cost prohibitive. And we're interested in what our partner watershed associations are able to cobble together and hoping to learn from that, at least especially in use in our kind of most problematic areas. When it comes to nutrients and dissolved oxygen problems, solutions are broadly similar in that we start with a hotspot survey to find out potential point sources or to identify big problems like, whether it's a large field that maybe is being fertilized improperly or not taking the appropriate stormwater control measure. It might also provide us some specific locations for us to address our messaging. So leaf litter and fertilizer campaigns that we run in the fall and spring respectively. Maybe there are areas we can target that messaging better to get more outcome from it. We also raise awareness with the local community about the nutrient input and what it does to our streams and riverways. And obviously increase the amount of what used to be called BMPs and now we're calling stormwater control measures in ways we can both infiltrate that water and also filter it out to preserve water quality. And the last thing we do with our data that doesn't apply to everyone in our watershed, but certain towns that have paid in to kind of get a specific town report and press release. We currently structure these reports to analyze about the last 10 years worth of data at these sites to get kind of a sense of rolling trends. We'd love to hear from you about whether this is the right format to be presenting this information, whether you find it useful. We're putting this report together either way, so we'd want it to be useful to you in what you would need from it or want from it. So it's currently in a kind of formal report structure that kind of takes a deeper dive into the last 10-year data. But that's not the most publicly accessible way of presenting this data. It does currently focus on bacteria, phosphorus, and dissolved oxygen because that's what's present at all of our sites, or collected at all our sites. But there are, as I said, certain sites that get chlorophyll and ammonia and phosphate that we could take a look into as well. Again, with the caveat that, we'd obviously like to do all of this if we had all the time in the world. But some specific suggestions that we'd like your feedback on about ways we could change this in the future are including a report card framing analysis. So kind of like using the report card structure of grades A to F, whether that's helpful, whether it's useful to take a dive into how those grades are broken down and say, it's really because of rainy weather, or it's really affecting the swimmable grades, but it always stays boatable, or something like that, or it's always a mix where it's never good for recreating on rainy days, but always good in the dry weather. That kind of deeper dive analysis is something that we could dive into in these town reports a little bit more. We could also reorganize the structure of the report a little bit to kind of highlight the key takeaways. We've done that a little bit. For those who get it, there's a table at the end that kind of highlights the key takeaways for every site. It does tend to get a little bit long for towns that have many sites, and I'm hoping it's useful, but if it's not, let me know. And then as we've added more chlorophyll this year into our analysis, as we move to more ponds, we're likely to add chlorophyll into that nutrient analysis so we can get a sense of what's happening, especially in those, more slow-moving, easy to build up algae areas like ponds. And I think that's it for what I have. Oh no, sorry. In terms of what we can, use from the collective group here, site suggestions are welcomed. We're obviously at capacity in terms of total sites, but if you have suggestions for areas that should get looked at, there are sites that might be phased out in favor of new sites. Obviously, on a rolling yearly basis, we kind of have that conversation, but if you have suggestions, we'd love to hear them. If there's large construction projects or environmental incidents happening in your town or city, let us know. We operate the stormwater hotline for NSP and are hopefully redirecting those to you and your or the respective department in your town. If you know something in reverse and you want to let us know, that'd be great, because it also helps us, either look at the data around that time or maybe plan a hotspotting event around some kind of impact so we can understand it better. And just in general, any kind of feedback about our water monitoring programs, the data we collect, and the way we get that data to you, any feedback on that about what's useful, what's not useful, what could be better, suggestions are all welcomed. And with that, I'll stop and ask if anyone's got any questions. Thanks.